I want you to give Sondra a round of applause. Oh, okay, very good. We have more than we know what to do.
Pocket today.
Wonderful.
There you go. Came prepared. Hi, everybody. It is so good to be back here. Really, it's great. So, did everybody get one of these? Anybody doesn't? There's more. Did you get? Everybody got? Okay, well, there's more here if anybody needs. I always start with business. Next. Oh, thank you. That is perfect. Okay, next. Now, I know most of you, we've met many times, and it's so great to see you, but some of you are new. But I would love it if all of you would just put your names down on the list I'm sending around. Those of you who are new and are not yet on our list, please put down your name, address, email, everything, so that we can bombard you with email. No. We're gracious. We don't do too badly, and if you don't like it, you can always say you don't want any more. But it's messages from Israel that I think you'll like, and Bible teachings. But those of you who are already getting it, if you just put your name down, because it helps me remember who it was that I saw this time and who it was that I haven't seen in 10 years and whatever. Okay, so I'll start this around at this end and just pass it around. Okay, good. So let's get started. This past week's Torah portion is it. What? You got it. You always know these things, Jim, I'm telling you. Isn't his Hebrew good? Yes. I mean, every time, I love it. I love it singing the songs. Can we do more songs in Hebrew? I love it. Yeah. Okay, good. Except don't ask me to sing. I just sing along. Anyway, no, seriously now. So this past week's Torah portion was Lech Lecha, Genesis 12. There is no, oh, hi, Nikki. How are you? I don't want to embarrass you, but there's no better Torah portion if you're a real Zionist. I mean, really. I can't say I favor one Torah portion or the other because it's all the Bible and it's all God's word, right? But this is where our story begins. Okay, the first 11 chapters of the Bible are the story of humanity. A very important story, okay? But starting in chapter 12, we get the story of the nation of Israel, beginning with Abraham. And it is the story begins with God's selection of Abraham, right? He talks to him, he says, the Lord said to Abraham, go forth from your land, from your birthplace, from your father's home, to the land that I will show you. And I have a few things I want to explore here, okay? Now, first question is, you know Jews, we ask questions all the time, right? That's how you study. You have to first ask a question. So my first question is, why Abraham? What do we know about Abraham that gives us even a hint as to why God would have chosen him? Now, think about this for a second. What does the Bible tell us about Abraham prior to this moment in time? Do we know what he was like as a child? Do we know of any prophetic experiences that he may have had prior to this point? Do we know of any unusual acts of charity or faith that he, we know nothing. Now compare that to Moses, for example. We know so much about Moses. We know why he was born, when he was born, he was hidden, and he was rescued, and who raised him, and how old, and what he did when he was 17, and we know all of this. So then by the time we get to chapter 3 and Exodus and the burning bush and all that stuff, we say, okay, we know something about Moses. God chose him, but we already know something about him. Abraham, nothing. Now, if you go back to chapter 11, the end of chapter 11, we learn that Abraham exists in a series of genealogy, right? We know he's the son of Terach. And then we learn something else. It's one thing, by the way, the Torah portions divide, the whole Bible. And is an interesting thing that happens when you are used to beginning with a Torah portion. You are used to seeing, to a certain degree, every Torah portion as its own unit. Very few people, when they start reading chapter 12 and they see God spoke to Abram and commanded him this commandment, go to Israel, essentially, go to the land that I will show you. Very few people say, oh, but wait a second, he already left for the land of Canaan in chapter 11. Chapter 11 was last week. Who remembers what happened last week? We never read them together, and I happen to think that that was done on purpose, but okay. What happened last week? What happened, the week before in chapter 11? We find out, verse 31, and Terah took his son Abram, and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, the wife of Abram, his son, and he went with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go to the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran, and they settled there. So, what is going on here? We read chapter 12:1, that God speaks to Abram and says, go forth the land that I will show you. And God doesn't say there, by the way, to go to Canaan. We only find out afterwards in verse 6, when Abram gets to Canaan, and God says, I'm going to give this land to your children, then we know he's arrived, right? But if Abram already left with Terah to go to Canaan, so what is God, what's God's news here? What's the big deal? Okay, now I didn't make up this question. This is an obvious question. Okay, but I want to explore this a little bit with you because I think it tells you a lot. So that's one question, okay? So actually now we've asked two questions. We've asked, what do we know about Abraham, or what was it about Abraham that brought God to choose him? Question number one. Question number two, what's the big deal about Abraham going to the land of Canaan from the special command from God when he was already doing this? Terah got no command from God. Terah just did this, okay? Now, so I want to look for hints, and I'm going to bring you some Jewish traditions that are not in the Bible, but I think enriches our understanding, okay? So first of all, let's look for hints. We don't know anything about Abraham before he leaves to go to Canaan, but we know quite a bit about Abraham once he gets to Canaan. And there's a few things that stand out. That, look, I'm not going to, we could spend weeks studying Abraham. We're not going to do that, okay? Don't worry, I know you want to go home tonight, we're not going to be here all night. But I want to just select a few things, okay? So he comes to Canaan. We learned he comes to Shechem, and and God promises the land. And what's the first thing he does? Verse 7, and he built there an altar to the Lord who appeared to him. And then, 2 verses later, we learn that he leaves that area, the place of Shechem, and he travels to his next stop, which is? No, that's later. Bethel. Goes to Bethel. And what happens there? And he built there an altar to the Lord. So here's a man, he likes to build altars to God. Okay? In that verse 8, after he builds the altar in Bethel, what else does it say? And he called in the name of the Lord. Now, we called in the name of the Lord, what does that mean? To me, it means he declared, he proclaimed the name of the Lord. And we will see that he does that 2 more times. In chapter 13, when he comes back, he went down to the Negev, goes to Egypt, comes back again, okay? And it says here in chapter 13, he says he returns to the Negev, coming up until Bethel, to the place where he had put his tent beforehand, okay? To the place of the altar that he had initially made there. And then what do we see? And this is verse 4. And he called there in the name of the Lord. Okay? So he called in the name of the Lord twice in Bethel. Once on the way down, once on the way up. Okay? And then there's another time that we have that he calls in the name of the Lord. Where is that? Somewhere. See, I underlined it, but I underlined so many other things. It's here. I don't know. I'll find it. Whatever. But he builds another altar in chapter 13, verse 18. He goes then to Hebron, and he builds an altar there. Okay? I find this very interesting. He builds an altar in Shechem, Samaria. He builds an altar in Beit El, which is like Benjamin. And he builds an altar in Hebron, Judea. We've got ourselves covered here. He is picking out the hot spots of Judea and Samaria, and that's where he's building his altars. That's just a side point, okay? So he's doing two things. He's calling in the name of the Lord, and he is building altars. Now, there's this other place that I love this encounter, okay? There's that huge civil war that's going on in the world. Not civil war, world war. You know, the 4 kings against the 5 kings and whatever. And Lot is taken prisoner, and Abraham really doesn't want to get involved in this major war. He has only one concern. He wants to rescue Lot. And so he joins this war in order to rescue his nephew. And he succeeds. And all these kings that he has now effectively helped win this war are very grateful. These are all kings of Canaan, okay? And they come out, and we meet this fellow, who's an interesting fellow, Melchizedek, okay? And we learn that Melchizedek is himself a priest to the Almighty God. Okay, so Abraham maybe is not the only one. There's somebody else over there, okay? And he comes out and he blesses Abraham, and what does he say? And all the kings are there. King of Sodom. I'm assuming King of Sodom is not such a great man. We know that Sodom is not such a great place. But whatever. They're all there, all these kings. And he comes out, this Melchizedek, and he blesses Abram, and he says, "Blessed Abraham to the Most High God, creator of the heaven and the earth." Okay? And blessed is the high God which has protected you. Okay? So here we have this amazing declaration of this Melchizedek to Abraham, recognizing that Abraham himself in some way represents the Most High God. That it is the Most High God that has protected him, and that he himself is seen among all these people as representing him. And then Abraham, in response, says, well, there's this interaction with the king of Sodom who says, you know, I'll give you property and whatever. Abraham says, I don't want your money, you know. But he says something else. He says he takes an oath in the name of the Most High God, creator of the heavens and the earth. I think what I'm seeing here is Abraham, who is an ordinary person in the sense that he's dealing with the trials and tribulations of life. He is a stranger in this land. He's forced into a war. He knows how to manage that. He knows how to rescue Lot. He's dealing with famine. He goes down to Egypt. In other words, he is hit with the challenges of life, and he meets them, but always proclaiming the name of God. To the extent that Abraham himself doesn't become famous for being the greatest warrior. He becomes famous because he proclaims the name of God. Okay? So if we think about why is it that God would have chosen Abraham for this amazing destiny to go to the land of Israel, we have to assume that the same way he's proclaiming the name of God after he got to Canaan, he was probably already proclaiming the name of God before he got there, when he was in Ur of the Chaldees. Okay? Now I'm going to share with you Jewish traditions. Do you know what the Midrash is? Have you heard about the Midrash? The Midrash is volumes of stories, legends, that are stories about the biblical figures that in many ways fill in the holes in the biblical text. Okay? This kind of a hole. What do we know about Abraham before he's 75 years old? The Bible tells us nothing. The Midrash tells us a great deal. Now, I have to tell you, I'm not saying you have to believe that the Midrash is true. You can. We don't know. These are clearly traditions that have been passed down. They were written down already between the 3rd and the 9th centuries in all these different books, but they were oral traditions way before that. And so you could say, yes, it's the truth, and you could say, well, it's nice. The point of the Midrash is not to tell you new history. The point of the Midrash is to teach you a lesson, to convey a message. And that's what's important here. What does the Midrash say? The Midrash says, number one, that Abraham already came to recognize God at the age of 3. At 3 years old, Abraham goes out and he looks above him to the stars and to the sun and to the moon, and he says, there must be a power that controls all of this. The sun disappears at night. The moon disappears during the day. There must be someone beyond those stars that control it all at the age of 3. The Midrash also tells us that as a young man, he already begins to believe that pagan worship is ridiculous. And there's all kinds of stories. There's a really great story. It's told in many different versions, but it's just a great story. And the story goes as follows. His father, Terach, who we know was an idol worshiper. Where do we know that he was an idol worshiper? No. Joshua. Who said Joshua? You got it. Joshua 24. Joshua 24. It pays to just, I'll show you this in a second, you know. And Joshua makes this speech to the nation, and he says here, Joshua 24, verse 2, your forefathers lived on the other side of the great river, Terach, the father of Abraham, and the father of Nahor, and they worshipped strange gods. That's the source, okay? So we know Terach was an idol worshiper. So this is the story. Not only was he an idol worshiper, he sold idols. He sold idols, and he had an idol store. And one day he goes to town, and he leaves Abraham to mind the shop. Okay, somebody comes in, a lady comes in, and she's bringing an offering for the idols. And she brings an offering, and she gives it to Abraham. She says, here, do me a favor, please give it to the idols. Okay? Okay, she leaves. And then he decides he's going to smash all the idols. He says, this is ridiculous. These people are bringing food to the idols. It's so ridiculous. He takes a big club, and he smashes all the idols. And then he takes the club and puts it in the hands of this one big idol that he doesn't destroy, a big Buddha or something, you know. And he puts the stick, the club, in the hands of that idol. So his father comes home, and he sees all of his merchandise is destroyed. And he goes, what have you done? What's going on here? Abraham said, it wasn't me. He says, you see this offering? This lady brought the offering for the idols, and the idols were fighting between them. Which one gets the offering? And the big idol says, stop fighting, all of you, smashed them all, and decided he's the one who's going to get it. You see, the stick is in his hand. So Terach says to Abraham, what are you, crazy? You know idols have no power. There's no way that they can go smashing up other idols. And Abraham says, well, if they have no power, why are you worshiping them? Isn't that great? It's a great story. Okay, but what's the point? Okay, what's the end of the story? The end of the story is that word gets out, and this is the most important part. Until now, it's cute, it's fun, and whatever. Word gets out to the king that Abraham is a heretic. Abraham doesn't believe. The whole society, the king, everybody believes in idols, and word gets out that Abraham doesn't believe that stuff. He's a heretic. He believes in this one God thing. Well, the king gets very angry, summons Abraham, throws him in a furnace. Does that remind you of something, by the way? What happens when someone else got thrown in the furnace? Daniel, right? And they walked out. Same story. So there's no question, that's where these stories, they develop, they take themes from other biblical stories, okay? But anyway, again, what's the purpose here, the message? So the king throws Abraham into the furnace, and he walks out miraculously saved, okay? Now, there's a verse God says to Abraham, I can't find it again. He says to Abraham, I am the Lord your God who took you out of Ur of the Chaldees to give you this land. I can't find it. It's somewhere. In here somewhere. Okay? He tells him this. Okay? And what the Midrash is trying to say, what does he mean he took him out of the Ur of the Chaldees? He saved him from the Ur of the Chaldees. He chose him in Ur of the Chaldees because in Ur of Chaldees, God recognized that Abraham is willing to stand up for his faith regardless of what everybody else thinks. He was the lone person who believed in the one God, and everybody else thought he was wrong, and he even risked his life, and the king tried to kill him, and God, of course, saved him. And at that moment in time, what the Midrash says, at that moment in time, God chose Abraham. And that, of course, is consistent with the idea that when Abraham comes into Canaan, he goes around proclaiming the name of God. That is what Abraham represents. He represents a man who thinks and believes differently than everybody else. But it is that belief that he then bequeaths to the entire world. God says to Abraham, he changes his name from Abram to Abraham. And why? He says, because you will be the father of many nations. Not just the father of Israel, but the father of many nations. Abraham was the father of the belief in the one God. And Abraham stands for a person who is going to do what's right and consistently follow what he believes to be true and to follow God's word even when it is unpopular, even when it is dangerous. Now let's tackle the next question. What is this that the two, what was the big deal in God's command to Abraham to go to the land of Canaan if already they had left Ur of Chaldees to go to Canaan? They didn't get there, but they already had this idea. What was the difference between God's commandment to Abraham and Terach's independent thought to go to Canaan? So here, there's a number of, based on different things, I want to present a perspective here, okay? Terach left Ur of the Chaldees for the same reason that people leave one place and move to another all over the world from the beginning of history to today. Now, one reason could have been, if we take that story about, the king tried to kill Abraham and then he was saved. So one version of that story says, Terach takes a look around and says, okay, this time Abraham is saved, but clearly the king is going to be afterwards. We're out of here. We're going, okay? So he was leaving Ur of Chaldees because he was in danger. And he was looking for a safe place to be. Now, Haran. Why didn't he ended up settling in Haran. But his initial plan was to go to the land of Canaan. Why did he stop in Haran? Or why didn't he think to begin with to go to Haran and not go all the way to the land of Canaan? So one of the reasons that he may have thought to go to Canaan rather than just to Haran was that Haran was too close. Haran spoke the same language as Ur of the Chaldees. The political alliances between those two regions were very close, and so it's very possible, he says, I can't get far enough away. If I'm only in Haran, the king can still get to me, okay? And actually, when I thought of this, it reminded me, my grandfather, in 1938, left Hungary. Actually, he left Czechoslovakia. Because he saw Hitler coming. And he said, you know what? He already saw the Nazi movement growing in Czechoslovakia, and he saw Hitler's had already captured part of Czechoslovakia, not the part where he was. And he says, you know what? I'm out of here. And he decided to go to America. He says, America is far enough away. But he got as far as England, because that's where he was able, it was very hard to get a visa. and my grandfather played the tricks so he could get out. So he figured out a way to get to England. He got to England, and he could have stayed there. It would have been like Terach going, I want to go to America, but I got to England, and okay. But in England, he said to himself, what Terach didn't say, you know what? I'm still a little too close to Hitler. I got to get out of here. And he found a way to continue and get to America. But you can understand this idea. You want to get as far as you can from the danger, okay? But Terach then gets to Haran, and I guess things were good in Haran, so he stayed there. Let's remember, why is it that Terach left? Either from danger, or just because, maybe, his business wasn't doing so well now that Abraham destroyed all his idols, had a downturn in his business, whatever. He goes to Haran. He stays there. On the other hand, in this very interesting comparison of the verses, in the case of Terach, at the end of chapter 11, it says, they went, blah, blah, all the details, to go to the land of Canaan. They came to Haran, and they settled there. In the case of Abraham, it says, they went, this is in chapter 12, verse 5, they went to go to the land of Canaan, and they came to the land of Canaan. So whereas Terach had a plan and didn't get all the way to the end of his plan, and it's very obvious, he changed routes in the middle, Abraham has a plan, and he gets there. He fulfills his destiny. Okay, but what's the main difference here? Terach goes for normal, natural reasons. Whatever it may be. He decided things might be better. Let's go, let's get out, safer, better, whatever. Why does Abraham go? Because God commanded him. That's the only reason. And that's what chapter 12 tells us, and that's why the Torah portion begins with chapter 12 and not with chapter 11. Because the fact that Terach left for ordinary reasons doesn't turn Terach into the first Zionist. He just turned him into somebody who's looking for new opportunities. When Abraham left because God promised him or told him, go forth from your father's house. And not only that, look at what God tells him to do. Leave it all behind. Don't gather your father and your brother and your cousin and all these people and take it with you. Just you go and your immediate family. And he kind of takes Lot with him. You get the sense he's an orphan nephew, so he kind of takes him along. But he doesn't take all the rest of them. He leaves that whole family there in Haran. No, God says, you leave it behind because I want to separate you from those negative influences and from that pagan society, and I'm going to select you to do something different. When we look, and I don't just say Abraham was the first Zionist. I think Abraham is the model for Zionism, and even more than that, he is the model of making aliyah. When a Jew decides to leave his country, his birthplace, his father's home, and to go to the land that God has shown us, we look at Abraham and we see our role model. And we realize, I'll tell you something, there are many people that left wherever they were to come to Israel for practical reasons. I mean, it could be that they were suffering anti-Semitism. It could be that they had persecution. It could be they were financially in trouble. You look at the Jews that came to Israel from Russia, for example, the survivors after the Holocaust, the people who came to Israel before. People came for a variety of reasons, okay? But there were some people that the primary reason they came may well have been purely practical. To get to a place that's safe, a place where there's no anti-Semitism, a place where we can be our own nation, we can decide our own destinies. In fact, classical Zionism, secular Zionism, is very much about that idea. Let's find a place where we can be independent, where we can be safe, okay? But Abraham's journey is a whole different kind of journey. So when I left the United States to move to Israel, believe me, I was not running away from anything. I had a good life. I had a good education. I had a good career. I was making a lot of money. And I could have done that. I couldn't have done it because it was not fulfilling at all to me. But, and a practical way, I could have kept doing that. I did not leave America because I was running away from something. I left America because I was being called to Israel. Amen. And it's Abraham who gives us this model. And when I think about the settlement movement, the settling of Judea and Samaria in the biblical heartland, you know what? One of the things makes me crazy when you hear people talking about the settlement movement. And they talk about, and I'm not talking about anti-Semites. I'm not talking about people who hate Israel and want Israel to jump in the sea or something. I'm not talking about those kind of people. I'm talking about fine, nice people, including most American presidents and most leaders of Western countries who are fine people, other than the fact that they're politicians, but they're fine people, right? And one after the other is against the Jewish presence in Judea and Samaria. They're not anti-Israel. They're not. Some of them are, but most of them are not. Most of them will say, but what do you need it for? Take the rest of Israel. Leave that stuff to the Palestinians. What do you need it for? That's what they'll say. And yet, we will say, it's ours. And I'm not even going to discuss the security issues because those are very significant issues. The area, this. This is an area that's a mountain range. It's the strategic depth of Israel. We don't want a hostile Palestinian state run by Hamas, within 2 miles of the main airport. All those are very practical reasons, and they are all valid reasons. But I want to go to the deeper reason, okay? Judea and Samaria is part of Israel because God gave it to us. When Abraham stood on that mountain for the first time near Shechem, and God spoke to him and said, I will give this land to your children, he was standing in the middle of Samaria. He was standing right in the middle of the area that the world says doesn't belong to you. That's Palestine. What are you doing there? And my answer is, what do you mean, what am I doing there? If the Jewish people have a right to any part of the land of Israel, it's because God promised the land to Abraham. And where do you think that promise happened? Right there in Samaria. Look at where he built the altars. What do we just say? Shechem, Beth El, and Hebron. You go now and ask the current president of the United States, well, what do you think, Mr. Biden? Do you think Israel belongs in Beth El, Shechem, and Hebron? Anyway, believe me, he's going to say no. And yet it is in those places that Abraham built the altars. And what is Abraham's message to us? Proclaim the name of the Lord. This is the area that God has given to us, and it is our responsibility to go to this area and proclaim the name of the Lord. We dare not be shy. And that's what the settlement movement is all about. From the beginning, bold people, very bold people, went out before the government decided it was a good idea. They came around later. It began with people who heard the voice of God, who modeled themselves after Abraham, and they said, you know what? The time has come to leave our comfortable homes. You know what I think of? I think of Daniela Weiss. You all know her, right? And I've heard her story so many times. She was living comfortably in Ramat Gan. She was married. She already had children. She lacked nothing. And there was no reason in the world for her to get up and go to this godforsaken mountain and live in a barracks, okay? Initially in a tent, then in a barracks. Oh, there was no reason in the world for her to do this. And the only reason she did it is because she heard God calling to her in the same way that God called to Abraham, go forth from your father's house, from your land, not your land, let's say where you are right now, from your birthplace to the land that I will show you. Everything about our settling in Judea and Samaria has been about one person or a small group of people standing up in the midst of people who think we're crazy, in the midst of people who think we're wrong, and standing and doing what we know is right because we have heard God's call to us, go forth, lech lecha, lech lecha, go forth, and go and claim that land, and claim your promise, proclaim the name of the Lord. Amen? Amen. Okay. Now, I talked a lot. Okay. I just want to finish up with something, and then I want to open it up for questions, because I am sure that many of you have all kinds of questions, certainly about politics and whatever. But I just want to tell you a few stories, or maybe one story, about what some of the pioneers, today we're close to 500,000 Jews living now in Judea and Samaria. You've been to Dumim. Some of you may have been in Karnei Shomron. You may have been in Ariel. You may have been in Efrat, Kiryat Arba. These are established communities. Thousands of people live there. They have proper homes and everything. And so it would be easy to say today, well, the hard times are over. The pioneering days are done. Now, people move into regular homes in Judea and Samaria, no more tents, Although Daniela Weiss is still looking at tents, but whatever. Now let me tell you about what some of these communities are going through. In the past few weeks, I really focused on the Hebron Hills area of Judea. It's that area west and south of Hebron, okay? The southern part of Judea. A number of communities, all very small, all very isolated, all quite surrounded by hostile Arabs. It's an area where there's a lot more Arabs than Jews in that area. Picture Hebron. The Arab part of Hebron is massive. And then further south of there, you have Yatta, which is a huge Arab town. And then you have Tarkumia and Dahariya and all these places that are really nasty, okay, and big. And then you have these small communities. So I had a meeting. I went to visit the people in Otniel. Otniel is a lovely community, small, a community that hasn't grown in years. They have, 100 families, not even, very small, regular houses and everything. They haven't succeeded in growing because so many people are too frightened to go live there. A few years ago, within the period of just like a year or two, there were constant terrorist attacks. I don't know, you may have remembered there was a young woman that was murdered at the entrance to her home in front of her daughter. There was a man, her name was Daphne Meir, Mickey Mark, a man was murdered on the road in the entrance to the community. A couple years before that, there were a bunch of yeshiva students visiting there, and terrorists came into the kitchen and murdered the people in the kitchen, the young men that were working in the kitchen. They've had so many stories, and so people are afraid. It's hard. It's very hard. And yet they have stuck to it. They're there. They have stuck to it. They haven't left. That's an amazing, amazing ability to hold on. And of course, we've done whatever we could to help them. And recently we bought them, we gave them money for a fire station. Because just a couple months ago, Arabs lit fires at the edge of the community, and the fires came literally this close to the house. And they didn't have a fire engine. They were standing there with fire extinguishers, and then they called from the central fire extinguisher, whatever, the fire departments of Israel, and they came with planes and whatever, but it was so close. And I got a call from this community, and they said, we are so afraid. It was a miracle that no one was hurt, a miracle that the houses were saved. I mean, the whole field, up until the house was burnt, I saw it. And that's just one story. Then there was another community, and I was there. We had breakfast, gorgeous. We're sitting on the porch, and we're looking out at this beautiful beautiful pastoral setting, the mountains, and you see the valleys, and it looks empty. And then the head of security shows me what we see over there. He says, we are constantly seeing Arab terrorists coming from there, creeping along, testing us out to see where we are vulnerable, where we will see them, testing us out to see, and they've attempted many times to infiltrate the community. And he says to me, and we don't have cameras, and we don't have a Jeep. I have to say, thank God we were able to raise the money for them to have the cameras and the Jeep. The Jeep I got on Sunday, just part of this trip, amazing. But this is what people are living. And you could say, these are not people who came to Judea and Samaria because they're looking for a safe haven. I'm not sure this is a safe haven. But it's a safe haven in another way. It's a safe haven spiritually. These people are walking and proclaiming the name of God, and that is what gives them the strength to hold on, because they know that if they are not there, the Palestinian terrorists will be. And when they move out, they come in. It's a fact. It's a reality. It is what we're dealing with. It is what it is. And I have to tell you, I love being here in fellowship. I figured out, I first made a connection with this church almost 30 years ago when John Klein and David Pavlik came on behalf of fellowship looking for a place to tithe. And I met them. I wasn't doing Christians. I wasn't doing anything. I was just somebody in Carnation Rome that spoke English. And I met them, and that was when I first heard about fellowship. And it was a few years later when I started this organization that I came back. And I said, hey, fellowship, I remember you, I think. You still around? And that, I think, was like in 99, I think, something like that. I know my first trip here to the States in CFOIC, we started CFOIC in 98, and I think my first trip was in 99. So that was a long time ago. Anyway, you guys, we are the ones who are out there on the mountains doing our best to proclaim the name of God and to do what God wants us to do, what I think God wants us to do. And you have been there with us all along. When you proclaim the name of God in Israel, you need people who are hearing us to proclaim the name of God here. And that's what you're doing. You're doing this, you continue to do this, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being there and doing that with us all these years. Thank you. Okay. And now questions. Yes?
Could you share anything on Ghana, our group? Where are you, Jeremiah?
Oh, where are you, Jeremiah? Our goat farm? I haven't been there since before COVID. No, but they're moving along. That's why someone was there recently.
Well, actually, they were threatened. Their community is being threatened to be dismantled.
Yeah, but they got to stay on that.
They're putting sheep on the property, and with the hopes that having sheep on the
No, but they were going to tear down their trees, and there was a stay on that. Right. Look, I know that it is a complicated situation. The legal situation of their farm is complicated. It doesn't have necessarily all of the legal authorizations. But on the other hand, they have the full backing of the regional council, who believes that this is the right place to be. I think they'll be fine. But that doesn't mean it's not going to be a battle. That's a battle. And they're certainly out there, on faith, doing it, absolutely. Absolutely. That's really good. Anyway, any other questions? I'm just going to get a drink. 1 second. Anyone else? Good. Nobody wants to know about politics. I'm so happy.
Sondra, I would just like you to speak a little bit maybe about the fact that it seems like housing is frozen in Judea and Samaria, and yet the Arabs are being given billions of dollars to build in that area. Can you
Okay.
help us with that a little?
Okay, so, first of all, let me correct things a little bit. There was recent authorization given by the Israeli government to build more homes in Judea and Samaria, and for Jews, and at the same time, authorize some building for Arabs in Area C. And what was new was the authorizing of buildings for Arabs in Area C. Now, none of that building has happened yet, okay? But there's no question, my feeling, and most of us feel, that for years already, we haven't had the rate of building in Judea and Samaria that we should have had. If they would just let the free market work, you know, to the extent that somebody wants to live there, you build a house. And believe me, there's tremendous demand. The center of the country is very crowded, okay? Judea and Samaria, just for practical reasons, Judea and Samaria is in the center of the country, but it's not in, you know, the crowded cities. And it's a wonderful escape hatch for people who working in the center of the country, but too crowded or don't want to live in very expensive in Tel Aviv, you know, live a bit out. It's much cheaper, more beautiful, better quality of life. Even just for practical reasons. Not to mention those people who feel this commitment and Zionist ideology to go and settle the land. Unfortunately, for example, I was very, very disappointed. 4 years that Trump was president, who was the most favorable president to Israel, ever probably, and would have, my assessment, would have been much easier to deal with in terms of giving a green light to building in Judea and Samaria. And I felt that there was a tremendous missed opportunity that Netanyahu built so little during that time, okay? And this is what this current government has inherited. And the current government is in a much more difficult position because it's a coalition government between right and left. You have two parties, Bennett and Saar, who are to the right of Netanyahu, ideologically, and you have the Arab Party, okay, Ra'am, and you have the Meretz, which is the ultra-left Jewish party, both very extreme. And in order to create that coalition, they reached an understanding that neither side is going to accomplish much in their respective political agendas. There's not going to be a two-state solution, and there's not going to be sovereignty, okay? However, there is going to continue to be building, but, you know, not massive building, but there will be building. Now, this is what the declarations have been. Now, this government has only been in power a few months. And the main focus of this government has been, number one, dealing with COVID, number two, passing a budget, okay? So there have been declarations that there will be continued building, but it won't be massive, but you know what? It wasn't massive under Netanyahu either, right? So let's see it being built. For the first time, this government announced that they were going to create a new community in Samaria, Evyatar. That was something that hadn't been done in like 20 years or something. Okay, so these are the declarations. What will really happen? We don't know. We have to wait and see. I don't believe we can judge this government yet. I can tell you that I trust Bennett. I know Bennett. Bennett was the head of the Eshel Council. Bennett was the chief settler, okay? That's what he was. The Eshel Council is the Council of Jewish Communities in Judea and Samaria. His ideology is in the right place, okay? How he will handle his complicated political situation, I don't know. Will he succeed in advancing his agenda while at the same time keeping a government? I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. Maybe we'll just wait and see. Evyatar is very close to Ariel, near the Tapuach Junction. Yeah. So when you come out, let's say, from like Ariel, but not the back way of Ariel, like come on the main road with Ariel on your right and you get to the Tapuach Junction, it's like directly in front of you. So on the other side of the road. It's an area where there had been a few terrorist attacks, there was a young man that was killed, and the feeling was, and this is like on the hilltop there right overlooking that junction, that it was an important area strategically to help protect that. You have Tapuach is on one side, the community of Tapuach is on one side, putting this on the other side will kind of create this two sides of the road that would be more protected. And of course, it's just one more community in Samaria, which is always a blessing. Any other questions? Yes?
I have a question. It's more like a Bible. I'm pretty loud.
The Bible questions are the better ones.
Yes, this is more like a Bible teaching.
Yeah.
If you can give me your perspective, because you say that Abraham called upon the Lord, right, and he proclaimed, and then that's kind of like parallel when the descendants of Noah call upon the Lord. I don't know if you recall that part of the Bible. It's chapter 5.
Are you talking about Hanoch?
Yes, when that it says.
Yeah, Hanoch.
Yes.
I think
Enosh,
it's.
and when they say that at that time, the time of Enosh, they start to call upon the name of the Lord.
Right.
Okay, so will that be the same call as in proclaiming, or will it be as in looking for him?
No, I think it's the same idea. It's a recognition, And very often you're talking about Enosh.
Yes.
But one of the people that I also refer to, I think is very interesting, is Hanoch. What's Hanoch in English?
Yeah, it's on chapter 4.
Chapter 5.
Right before 5.
You're looking at chapter 4.
Verse 26.
Yeah, right, that's Enosh, right. So later on, you have Hanoch in chapter 5, verse 24. It says, Hanoch walked with God, and then he was no more as God took him. Enoch is in English? Okay, Enoch. That's an amazing statement, a man that walks with God. So you see and you have Noah, who walked with God, okay? And God says to Abraham, that you walked with me, you walked before me. So these are very important expressions of people, individuals, who were unique in calling out to God, walking with God, and the Bible notes them. But what was so unique about Abraham, when he was the only one who was able to influence his people around him and pass the message on to future generations. In every one of those other things, there was one person, Hanoch. One person, God took him to him. Noah, there's a whole flood. Noah isn't able to influence a single person to repent so that the flood doesn't come. Okay, so these are individuals. What happens with Abraham, he proclaims the name of the Lord, and people listen. Okay, you have these kings, and you have, I'm not saying they all become, righteous people and believe in the one God, but they look up to him and they say, oh, wow, okay? And he has others that are in his midst. You have this idea of all these people that he takes with him to fight the battle. All his, 318 or something. These are all people that are part of his household and who he's brought into this belief in one God. That's a whole different ballgame. Yes?
What is the government of Israel doing to open?
Sorry. What is the government of Israel doing to open up the country to visitors?
This is a big debate. So they announced some weeks ago that they were anticipating opening up to tourists November 1st. And then I just read this week that, they still want to make the November 1st deadline, but they don't know how they're going to do it and what the rules are going to be. And all these, it's the Ministry of Health is fighting with the Ministry of Tourism, right? The tourism wants it open, and the Ministry of Health says, no, you open the doors, you bring in more variants, we can't afford this, da-da-da. And so they're still discussing it. What I can say is that it will probably open, if not November 1st, December 1st, sometime in the next weeks if we don't see suddenly a new variant and the numbers shoot up again, it will open. But what will also is very clear is it will only be open, at least at this stage, to people who are fully vaccinated.
That's what I was wondering about.
Yeah, fully vaccinated. And one of the debates now, in Israel, we have been given the third shot already, the booster, and that already in August. And in Israel, you're only considered fully vaccinated if you've taken all three. And one of the discussions now is whether that will have the same requirement for people coming from other countries, recognizing that in other countries, you are fully vaccinated if you've had 2. So that's one of the things that they're debating about. So, and that's a technical thing. They'll figure it out. But, and also, don't forget, in America, for example, they're now starting to offer the booster. So, you know, these are things that are going to be dynamic. 2 shots, 3 shots. But no matter what, I think I can safely say that for some considerable time, you will have to be vaccinated. Hopefully, one day, this COVID will leave us. Or they'll find a good cure for it or something, and then we will go back to the old ways. But only God knows when that's going to be. Yes?
I just want to say thank you to Israel for having developed the COVID virus vaccine. You know, they were very, very instrumental to help with the COVID vaccine, that we were able to come up with some kind of a cure for this thing. And it's Israel, it's the Jewish people.
Well, we can't take credit for all that. Well, Pfizer, there are Jews involved and Israelis involved in the development of both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, but they are American companies, both of them. And I have to thank the government of the United States for pouring in the millions of dollars to fund the development and the research so that we could get the vaccine out as fast as we did. What Israel is, though, is becoming the world's laboratory, because we have been the first country that have given the first vaccines, and now we're the first country that gave the boosters. And so the CDC here is tracking the results in Israel and making decisions here based upon the data that they're getting from us. And that's fine. We're happy to do that. We're, you know, but it's a good laboratory. Israel's a very small country. And you need a small country to test things like this, you know, to see the effects. We're not spread out, you know, we're very small. And everybody knows everybody, so, you know. Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure. But I'll tell you something, you know, defense creates enormous challenges. But it, you know, and you're right, I wish that all the science that we, and the engineering and the technology that we invest in, we wouldn't have to invest it in military, we could do other things. But the truth of the matter is the fact that we have to invest so much in the military because it's a life and death situation has brought us to a point that we are able to develop technologies for all other things because we've honed those skills and we've created those, you know, smart people for the life and death situations, and then they're able to use that same knowledge for, you know, putting apps on your cell phone. Pardon? Yes, yes, well, that's it. Anyway, yes?
Question, why is it that they're so hard on the legal settlements in Israel, but they seem to allow, and the EU promotes the illegal building, I think it's in Area C.
Oh, you're talking about the Arabs?
Yes, ma'am, the Arabs.
Oh, that's such a good question. It's a terrible situation. Just to clarify what's going on, in Israel, there have been attempts, and there continue to be attempts to expand communities, and sometimes when the government doesn't allow us to expand, it becomes a ad hoc kind of situation where people just feel like we must settle this hill, we need to expand for a number of reasons. And they go ahead, and this is, and in some cases the Supreme Court has said, no, you've got to dismantle that community, that neighborhood, or whatever. It's usually, you know, small beginning kind of places that haven't received all the government permission. But it's very frustrating for us, and one of the things that we've been frustrated is that some of these communities require just the signature of the prime minister in order to make them legal. It was a technical thing. It wasn't like there was a problem with the land or something else, okay? So that's that, and part of that is because of the pressure that is, for years, that has come from the United States and the Europeans to, you know, force Israel to not to expand the communities as much. On the other hand, okay, you have all along, you have Arabs that, they don't follow rules or whatever. The situation today, though, is a different one, and that's what I think you're referring to. Under Oslo, the area of Judea and Samaria was divided into 3 regions, A, B, and C. Area A was given to the exclusive jurisdiction of the Palestinian Authority. They can build there whatever they want. It's their authorization, and they can do whatever they want. No one's stopping them. Area B is an area that is in the exclusive civilian jurisdiction of the Palestinian Authority, but remains under Israeli security administration. And there also, in Area B, the Palestinian Authority, because they have full civilian authorization, they can build wherever they want, and no one's stopping them. Area C, which is the area where all the Jewish communities are located, but there's also a lot of empty area there. There's nature reserves there. There's all kinds of things there, okay? Area C, and there's a few small Arab villages in Area C, very few, okay? In recent years, it has been discovered that the Palestinian Authority, rather than investing in building in areas A and B, they have a whole plan to build in Area C, and they've started doing it. Now, it is 100% illegal for the Palestinians to build in Area C without Israeli permission, because it is an area that remains under exclusive Israeli jurisdiction. And yet, we see today, it's not just that this family decided, I need more room or whatever, so I'm going to go build a house. It is a plan that has been, put together by the Palestinian Authority and funded by the European Union. And this is where I get really angry, okay? Palestinians, they're land grabbing, okay. That's what they want to do. We should be stopping them. We don't stop them. That's a whole different problem. I don't know why we're not stopping them, but we should be stopping them. But what I think is insane, the European Union is interfering in an area under the sovereign jurisdiction of another state. And they're giving money to the Palestinians, and they're saying, we want you to create a Palestinian state. Here's money, not to build in areas A and B, which under the international agreements of the Oslo Accords is fine, but build in Area C, which under the international agreements of Oslo is illegal. That makes me crazy. And I would love to see the Israeli government do something about it. But unfortunately, they haven't. Let's wait and see. Let's hope they do. Ask them. Look, I'm not looking to throw any Arab off their land. If it's their land and they bought it and they have their family and they have their home there, and we have good relations with Arabs. And I will tell you even more. More and more Arabs, Palestinian Arabs living in Judea and Samaria, want Israeli jurisdiction. Because they look at how Arabs are living in Israel, and they compare it to the way how Arabs are living in Gaza, and they say, well, which one do we want to be? Yeah, and look, and many Arabs who work in the communities in Judea and Samaria, or if they work in Israel proper, are making 3 to 4 times as much as Arabs who are working in Arab businesses in the Palestinian Authority. And they know this. They're not stupid. And there's some very good people there, and people who just want peace, and they just want to live together. And we may not all agree on ideology, and we don't agree on faith, that's for sure. But you can live with one another. You really can. It's the fanatics, it's the extremists, it's the violent ones that are really killing things. But we're still proclaiming the name of God, and we're not moving anywhere. Okay. Oh, one more thing. I have a commercial. I have a few copies of this book. This is a book I wrote it's short essays on each of the Torah portions, accompanied each one by color photographs from the communities. I have a few copies, so if anybody wants to buy, they're $25. That's it. That's my commercial. Thank you.